And we are back for part 2 of our final coverage of Reddit user Gsteff's Cushing Library trip, in which they uncovered some of the initial drafts for A Feast for Crows. Now, Preston, the next character mentioned in the post that you wanted to cover was Cersei. What's going on there?
Well, so Cersei, the most of Cersei is the same. There's one big. There's a couple big things, but most of Cersei was actually was the same, except for some kind of like language rewrites. But one of the things is, Cersei 4, my favorite chapter, is her small council, and one of the interesting things about one of the things they talk about was they're talking about an alliance with the Ironborn, because they're discussing how Roose Bolton is going to get his forces north in order to retake the north. And so, as we know, in the real published book, like, Ramsay comes down and uses Theon to open up Moat Cailin. But there was discussion in this previous draft of using small fishing boats from the Vale, like a whole ragtag fleet, to ferry Freys up north. And now this is relevant because Pycell questions whether that's a safe idea.
As always, Pycell in Cersei chapters, he's the voice of reason.
Right. And so like Pycell being the one who's like the only not idiot at the small council, or at least the not nefarious and not idiot character, is like, wait a minute, like, what about Stannis's like cell sales? Like, couldn't they come down and just like totally slaughter the force? And they kind of, everybody kind of dismisses it and ignores Pycell. But of course, what we do know in the book is that Manderly has built a fleet in A Clash of Kings. That's this Chekhov's gun, the Umber Manderly fleet that Robb ordered him to build in A Clash of Kings, that we have not yet seen, that we kind of know is lurking in the plot, would be there instead, because Pycell is saying can't Stannis' cell sales like come down and attack, but what he doesn't know is that Stannis' cell sales have abandoned him. Salladhor Saan abandoned Stannis, and so it's not that fleet would come down and slaughter the Freys, but the Manderly fleet would. And so we still have that Manderly Frey rivalry, but originally George's idea was clearly that the Manderlys were going to come out and defeat the Freys at sea, but then all that was scrapped, and the Freys followed Roose Bolton up by land and are at Winterfell, and we have the whole interaction and rivalry in the snowstorm, and all of that comes to be. But it's interesting that it was rather clear that George originally had this idea that he was going to use the Chekhov's gun of the Manderly fleet. He was going to use the rivalry and have the slaughter of Freys be done while they're in a bunch of like ragtag fishing vessels.
Well, if you're someone who hates the Freys, then that sounds like a great addition, but I kind of like what we got instead with the tense confrontation between them and Manderly and Winterfell, and him coming in with one of the best line in the series. Had he lived, he would have grown up to be a Frey, so I'll take this.
And what I also think is better about the way George did it now is Manderly is hell-bent on revenge, and it's self-destructive to him and other Manderlys. And I think that's a better theme than, yeah, we're going to kill those Freys and get them back, and then just kill the Freys and get them back. No, it's like you've got to, the idea is that vengeance is consuming, and Manderly doesn't come out of any of this unscathed in the published book. He's nearly dead, lying on the floor when we last see him. So yeah, it's I definitely like the way George changed things. I think just like killing everybody at sea and having it be neat like that is not really it's not George, you know.
And the idea, once again, I have to bring in Dave and Dan into this. The idea that Cersei would ally with the Ironborn. I'm wondering if this will make it into, because this happens in the television show in, I believe, season 7 and 8. I wonder if this is going to make it into the books going forward, that the Ironborn that somehow Euron will actually ally himself with Cersei, or if he's going to change that up.
I think there's a lot of evidence that's going forward. I mean, first of all, there's the Forsaken chapter where, you know, you kind of have this vision that Aeron has of like Euron with this like woman of flame, and the obvious person you're supposed to think of with a woman of flame is Daenerys.
Oh, Daenerys. I thought Melisandre.
It's a bait and switch, and it's probably Cersei and Wildfire and things like that, you know, like that. So the other thing is that there's a lot of weird connections if you look at family trees and histories between the Westermen and the Ironborn that are there, that you're like, huh, like why are there two house cases and things like this? One on the Iron Islands and one on the Westerlands, you know, and little things like that, little marriages, you know, that you know, like why did George choose these connections? And it just, you know, it seems like it might be something for, you know, a future thing down the line, like the Westermen and the Ironborn together. But that's my guess. I think it's pretty. I look at the family trees and the Forsaken chapter and then the show as evidence, and it's like, yeah, it does seem like there's going to be a Westerman Ironborn alliance at some point in the future.
Anything else with Cersei?
A few small things that don't make much of a difference. So at some point, you know, I think I said before that Qyburn mentions bringing. You know how Qyburn during that chapter mentions setting an assassin to the wall, and Arayn Waters recommends using one of the Drummonds that can hold 500 that he notes to bring up these Night's Watch recruits to assassinate Jon. And so, you know, there's this idea that, well, if that happened, like why is a ship that size important at the wall? Like, would it be used to evacuate Hardhome or something? Would you know? Why was he thinking about some huge ship being at the wall, and what use would it be? You know, because I think in the published story, he makes use of Tycho Nestoris's 3 ships instead, but it may have been that he was thinking about using Arayn Waters' ship.
The plot
in a previous draft.
The plot of an assassin going to the wall and trying to take out Jon Snow. Eventually, that's given in the show, at least. It's given to Roose Bolton and Locke, the Vargo Hope clone.
Yeah, and doesn't really go anywhere, right? He just kind of dies at Craster's Keep.
Well, the plan in the show kind of sucked, and this seems like the better version of that, kind of. Like, Roose Bolton just sent one guy, whereas Qyburn wants to make sure there's no room for error by sending multiple guys.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think the assassination plan is very good to begin with. Like, there's plenty of people at the wall already that are loyal to the Lannisters that would kill Jon Snow.
Really? Could you think of one guy? I don't know.
Yes, I know. So a few other things from the Cersei chapter. So originally Boris Blount died. Like, Boris Blount is still alive in the books, but he's looking very sickly. And so some people, like, Boris Blount originally did die, and so it was not when Cersei kind of harasses Pycelle to reveal Marjorie's moon tea situation. She uses Giles Rosby's death, like, oh, you let Giles Rosby die? What's wrong with you? But originally it was Boris Blount. And then also with Cersei, she mentions the Night Fort a little more. Again, we talked about this, how Melisandre was just more focused on the Night Fort being the center of the wall and how important it was. Apparently, even more time is given to just Night Fort background and Night Fort focus from Cersei and things like that. Oh, and a rather large thing that's actually kind of interesting about the Cersei chapters is there's no Maggie the Frog in the old. Yeah, so apparently that's a somewhat recent addition that Maggie the Frog was not in those original, because obviously this is how Maggie the Frog is pretty central to reading Cersei's story now. Just understanding like the madness and using it as a flashback to understand like Cersei's childhood and things like that. But it's just not even there. No mentions of Maggie the Frog and prophecy and any of that. And Gsteff says, well, in some ways it's kind of unsurprising, because the Cersei character, in A Clash of Kings and A Storm of Swords, where there's Tyrion is a clear adversary in those stories, she doesn't have any sort of like mention or talk of Maggie the Frog. Now, granted, you're not in Cersei's head in those books, but she's very willing to talk to Tyrion. It just seems like a sibling rivalry, not a I have a prophecy that you're going to murder me kind of like a situation. And really, even though I think a lot of us really like the Maggie the Frog stuff and how it makes Cersei crazy and it's all very intriguing, it doesn't actually square with the Cersei from A Clash of Kings and A Storm of Swords. Like she should be she should be treating Tyrion rather differently if she's really been having like prophetic thoughts about him for years or whatever. So